Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais in Ontario, Canada, with episode number 180 of the Yakking Show. This is a show that aims to enlighten you, enable you, hopefully entertain you, but most of all, awaken you to the new perspectives of the changing world we are living in, and it's certainly changing. As always, we have an interesting guest, but it's not my job to introduce guests because Kathleen does it a lot better than I do. Our co-host, Kathleen Beauvais from Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. Hi, Kathleen. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Peter, and thanks for that intro. And thank you all so very much for tuning into our show. We so appreciate you, and we love reading your comments. So please keep those coming. And if anyone out there is interested in being a guest on our show, please don't hesitate to reach out to either Peter or myself. And as Peter mentioned, we do have another special guest with us today. His name is John Manley. Hello, John. How are you today?
Hi, Kathleen, Peter. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, John, you are an author and you're also an activist from Stratford, Ontario. You've just published your first book, and it's called Much Ado About Corona, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But first, let's take another look at that.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, and we'll be sure to put that up again a little bit later on. But before we get started, tell us about your background and what led you into writing a book.
Well, those are kind of two separate questions in some ways, but I'm writing a book's been a dream of mine since I think grade 4. Actually, I was very slow at learning how to read. It took me until about grade 4, and I suddenly went from being illiterate to being able to read full-length novels in the course of 2 or 3 months. It was kind of a big
Wow.
leap for me. I don't know why. The first book I ever read was a Hardy Boy novel, and then I continued to read like another 100 of them, which have quite a bit of a template to them I started to discover after the 100th novel. So anyways, I went from that to writing, I remember I wrote this story about a lone goose flying, and I actually got in trouble with the teacher because she accused me of plagiarizing it, even though I had written it myself. So I went from almost being illiterate to writing this story that I got accused of plagiarizing. So actually I've been working on fiction probably 10 years ago. I was very heavy into it, and then I had a son. No, I guess that was 15 years ago. Having children kind of interfered with that, so I kept on writing fiction on the side, just a rough draft, 2 pages every day. I did that for 15 years. Anyways, when 2018, I really got focused and decided in 2019 I was going to finish a novel. And about halfway through that, the COVID situation started. And I decided to write a short story about the COVID situation. I just put my novel down for a little bit of time, and that short story turned into a 500-page novel. So at least I got a novel done, but it wasn't the novel I was working on. And it tied in a lot too, because I was very skeptical right from the beginning with what they were saying about the COVID situation, because I had, as my primary career was actually writing for ghostwriting for doctors, both medical and alternative. So I'd been, and usually writing material where it was material meant for the layperson. So I had to like dumb down. Mm-hmm. I don't want to say dumb down, because I think they try to make things overcomplicated, medical studies and so forth. They insist on using Latin for everything and that kind of thing. So anyways, I had been already well versed in interpreting medical situations, and when I saw this arising, I wasn't convinced at all that the reaction was anywhere near justified. So those two things kind of collided: my love for fiction and the love for, well, I wouldn't say it was a love, but my career, which was already involved in sort of deciphering medical truths and lies.
Okay, because I was going to ask you why you converted what I thought was going to be a simple love story into one based around this whole COVID virus story. But so you've answered that very well. So I've read the book. I would like to say I enjoyed it, and I'm going to qualify that saying I really enjoyed the way you wrote it. No, but it's a good qualification. I enjoyed the way you wrote it. I enjoyed your writing. I enjoyed your characters. I enjoyed the story, but the emotion that stirred up in me was one of anger. Which, as Kathleen quite rightly pointed out when we were talking about this the other day, I said, well, isn't that the mark of a really good writer, that he stirred up that emotion in you? And I said, yes, the reason it stirred up anger is I'm so close to it, because we live here. We've suffered exactly what your characters have suffered. And what you say in the book, you're preaching to the So I'm doing on my side a whole lot of stuff, which we don't need to go into because it's your show, not our. This is your episode. But that's why it stirred up anger in me, right? Because so much of it was so close to what I'd experienced myself and was experiencing and what I was seeing people experiencing. So I don't want to give the plot away, but I'm giving that qualification to tell all our viewers and listeners, this is a really good book, and you will feel what people in this part of the world have been going through. So now it's your turn. You tell our audience why they should read the book.
Oh, I appreciate hearing that. I have to say, I don't know how many people have said well, yeah, anger has been one emotion I have heard different people describe, particularly in reaction to certain scenes in the book and certain characters. In particular, the protagonist's parents. Actually, I found more people were angry towards the protagonist's parents than the villain of the story. They had more sympathy for the villain, who's an OPP police officer who, does horrible things in the novel, but they still found Vince's parents who disown him just because he has a positive COVID test and needs to be quarantined over Christmas. So it's one of those novels too. The feedback's been interesting because I've heard this expression: if you have 1,000 people read the same novel, they're all going to read a different novel, and you have 1,000 different novels. And I was shocked. I had one person describe it as mounting sexual tension through the book, and I was like, "What are we talking about? The same book?" So that was interesting. I mean, it is a love story, but I kept it very PG. There's two audiences, because you said I was kind of almost like it's preaching to the choir, and actually, and I have people who are on the other side of the fence coming over because of this novel, and that's been that was one of the goals. I have one. It actually shocked me. I didn't think this would work. My mother, who lives in a retirement home, she ended up buying, I think, 20 copies by now and giving it to all the attendants and PSWs and the receptionists in the retirement home. I said, "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea." And they all loved it. They were like, this confirms what's been in the back of my head, that something was wrong here. I've been surprised. Some of the people who have written me and said they bought this book, and they haven't actually been, they've been on accepting the official narrative regarding COVID. And for some reason, this book, they wanted to purchase it. They don't even know why they purchased it. And they said, well, this actually helped me. I don't know. I helped them for some. I don't know. Well, I think it's not a very didactic book. I mean, it does present a lot. I think it presents enough evidence to get people to at least come to the fence. And then there's enough resources at the back if they want to jump over the electric fence. And it's a hard fence to jump over because it is electrical. It's, in the sense that if you are going to shift sides on this opinion, it's not easy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then the flip side is we have people, maybe more in your category, who would come to me and tell me the book was therapeutic for them, that it was almost healing to this confirmation that what has almost become, the Prime Minister called a fringe minority view is really not as fringe as it's been made out to be, that enforcing rapid, expansive human rights violations in the name of protecting from a virus that didn't even seem to meet pandemic standards. So anyways, the exaggerated response, or possibly that's being polite. If I just say it was an exaggerated response, it could have been, I suspect, a lot worse. So yeah, I've been getting a lot too of where they find it very therapeutic.
Right.
Good.
So,
Kathleen.
So reviewers are saying that the book manages to depict the horrors of the mandates while making the story palatable with plenty of humor. How were you able to balance those two extremes?
I think, I had to work on this novel it took me over 1,100 hours and 2 years of work, averaging about 1 to 2 hours a day, and 18 drafts. So I think I needed to add the humor into it for my own sake. The original version of it was much darker, and it was hard to go through draft after draft of a dark story. I'm a big fan of a saying by Josh Whedon, who's a famous film producer, TV film producer. His most famous thing, I think, is Buffy the Vampire, which I've never seen, but he also did the Firefly series, which I think is a really brilliant dystopian. Have any of you seen it?
No, I haven't.
It was a TV show that he produced. It was canceled after 7 episodes, so that shows you how good it was.
Yeah.
They messed it up and they didn't want it on the air because it was speaking out against tyranny. But he had an expression that he used with it was, "You need to make it dark, you need to make it grim, you need to make it tough. But then, for the love of God, tell a joke."
Okay. Good one. Yeah. Interesting. So I got something I want to ask you, and I'm going to veer away from the book for a moment, but I want to ask you this before I forget it. You mentioned on your website that you escaped from the clutches of a cult and living in a commune, and not quite sure if they were both at the same time or not. So that really intrigued me when I saw that.
Yes, I at I guess I was 18. I graduated from high school a year early because I really wanted to get out of there that badly. And I moved to, it was actually kind of a Hindu yoga monastery in Southern California. Was run by one of those Indians who come over from India. I assume because India couldn't stand them any longer. I mean, they promised a lot, and it's one of those things too where a lot of the introductory stuff is very useful. They taught a lot of meditation, and it was kind of a hook and bait type thing where they give you very useful meditation techniques that I found life changing. But then they promised there was this ultimate meditation technique, and you could only get that if you signed your soul over to the organization. And they did a lot of the same stuff, actually, you see with the COVID situation where social isolation, being told that what you think is invalid and that you always had to listen to the authorities above you. I lived in there for 3 years. And I mean, a lot of the people there were wonderful people, just like you see like in the medical system and people enacting the police system, great people. They're just following orders from top down. It was the level of deception was very similar too, where we had very similar to the COVID mandates, where the authorities are telling us, you should mask, you should social distance, and we're getting pictures of them having parties, no mask, no social distancing. We had the exact same thing with like the monastics at the top. We were told that they were living in deep meditation and always in their room, and then we found out that they didn't even live on the property. That's why we never saw them. They actually lived in this big mansion in downtown not downtown Los Angeles, but this really rich section of Los Angeles. I believe it's called Sierra Madre. And it was actually the Los Angeles Times who cracked that one. And we were like passing the newspaper around. It was like, well, that's why we don't see them. They're living in a mansion. They have a poodle and a pool. And we're like living, the saying was, we got $1 a day and all you could eat. And small rooms. I mean, so yeah, I could go on, but I mean, there was just a very similar levels of deception, and where you eventually, it was like one by one, you on your own, you almost had to decide, okay, this is wrong. People who did leave usually did it quietly. People who did leave were often bribed to leave quietly, because a lot of them had no money by that time. So it was like, listen, we understand you want to leave. Here's $3,000. You don't say anything. Sign here.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And then did you come back to, sorry, Kathleen, you came back to Ontario after that?
Not really. Actually, I moved to Florence, Italy. I went from living in a monastery to living in like Florence, Italy when because I had two dreams. Well, my dream was to become a novelist. That was like since I was very young. So the logical thing to do was to become a painter. Yeah. Which actually was kind of a throwback to the monastery days, because they demonized novels there. Like that was one thing you were not allowed to read. You were hardly allowed to read any books except the books they gave you. So it was one of those situations. So unfortunately, I went towards portrait art, which was something I enjoyed. I did enjoy drawing, but it wasn't at the level of what I felt about novel writing. And especially, I'm also half blind. So fine portrait art was not the wisest thing to take on. But I did 2 years there, and then I did move back to Canada and tried to pursue the portrait work. It was I was doing great stuff, but it just took me too long to get the things done. And in the meantime, I ended up helping some people with their business writing, and I was like, I really enjoy this writing stuff. So I ended up helping more people with their business writing. That led to me helping doctors and naturopaths and a lot of rogue medical doctors, and it ended up becoming more of the career.
But
interesting.
I understand you're actually in the midst of writing another book. Can you tell us about that?
Oh yes, that's the sequel.
Ah,
Yeah, you can see the. I do everything in rough draft first, like the whole
Right.
novel was written. So I already got 90,000 words written and transcribed to the sequel. Though I have to admit, 45,000 words were written before I wrote this one, because I actually ended up writing the sequel first. This was actually flashbacks.
Okay.
And the flashbacks got out of control, so I just made the whole.
Made it in the book, and it was the right time to do it. So well done, very good, very good. So, do you want to say more about that, or you don't want to give too much away about the sequel at this stage?
Oh,
up to you entirely.
Yeah, I don't, because it really takes off from, the cliffhanger at the end of the novel, which apparently that's if you want to talk about anger, that's what seems to make most people angry about my novel is the cliffhanger at the ending. So I got an email from Ireland and it was just grrr,
all I'm going to ask you, will we see some of the same characters in the sequel? Can you give that away?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, some of the characters who were a little minor in the first book become much bigger, like Claudia, the nurse from the. So, but yeah, So and even with flashbacks, I can even keep some of the characters who got killed or died. So,
No, that's good. No, I'm looking forward to that one as well. So, I'm talking about characters. I got the feeling that some of the characters in the book are based on people either in your community or people that you've seen news of in the news and the media and this sort of thing. Some of them sound just so true to life that they have to be based on real people. Or is it all figments of your imagination?
No, I think there's a lot of truth in that because I actually, it's something I thought I was going to be really have a hard time with was doing the characters. And originally the novel only had 3 characters, and every draft it kind of expanded. No, it was 4 characters, and then by the end of the novel, there's quite a retinue of characters. Yeah. I mean, Stephanie, the main character, the one who's the quote unquote conspiracy theorist who caused all the trouble in the town, I'd say she was actually largely based personally, partly on just my own personality and my own self. And then Tamara Ugolini from Rebel News.
Yeah.
You're familiar with her.
Yes.
And then I had a friend in high school who was actually very much involved with protests and going against things that she didn't agree with on a large scale. And her name was actually Stephanie too, spelled with the German F, which I liked because that added a bit of rebellion, so that her name wasn't spelled properly. And it actually made more sense to spell it with an F. And there's that one scene when the cop comes into the bakery and she kind of shows how she's not scared of him because he's like, well, what's your name? And she's like, Stephanie Mula. And he's writing it down and he's like, well, make sure that's an F, not a PH, and make sure you put the 2 dots over the U, and just as an opportunity to show she wasn't afraid. Vince, I think, was just kind of an archetype for the common Canadian who is on the fence. If no one tells them something's not wrong, they'll just go along with it. But I think subconsciously they realize something's wrong with what's happening, and we're seeing a nice shift where more people are waking up and realizing that this inner feeling they had that this was so many levels of this are not true. And then the grandfather was very much modeled after my own father, who actually had dementia too. A lot of the lines in there were straight out of my dad's mouth.
Really?
Yeah.
Very
and
good.
I don't think I could have pulled out a dementia character without having, spent so much time with one. And
sure.
I don't think I exaggerated it. So yeah, those are some of the characters. I could go on. Every one of them actually I could probably link to somebody.
Oh,
excellent.
And I take it then you had to do quite a bit of research before starting this novel, right? Even though these characters are fictional and the storyline itself is fictional, but you must have had to do some digging into, do some research behind the mandates and behind COVID itself and all of that, correct?
Yes, I mean, when I say 1,100 hours, that doesn't include any of the COVID research. At the time when March what was it? 2020, I guess it was.
2020, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, when the prime minister announced that he was going to put everyone under house arrest for their own good.
For 2 weeks.
Yeah, for just 2 weeks. Yeah, even that sounded absurd to me, just 2 weeks. But I had a gut feeling he wasn't going to do it. That was just the beginning. He did it on a dark moon too, which I don't know if he did it purposely or not, but it was announced on the day of the dark moon, and I started immediately. I put up a website called Much Ado About Corona, and I was writing the novel. I was writing a short story, just a 500-word short story, which came 500 pages. But every day I put out about a 500-word article, just doing some research and then sharing it with the world in a simpler form, much like what I was already doing for the medical doctors, so forth, where I take complex stuff and simplify it down. And I thought, oh, this will work very well. I'll just put out an article a day, and people will just go, oh yeah, of course, this doesn't make sense. There's no evidence to justify the threat or what they're doing. So I did that consecutively for a whole year. And after a year, I realized, okay, this left brain stuff's not working with most people. And that's when I shifted more to the novel writing. On top of that, though, interestingly, is I probably spent 200-300 hours of that time, of the 1,000 hours I spent on the novel, researching other elements that had nothing to do with COVID.
Right.
Because you'll see there's so many tidbits in there that,
oh yes,
like,
there's lots.
So that actually brings me to my next question. Because of all the research that you've done, this is just your personal opinion on this, but do we have reason to be optimistic for the future? Do you think they're going to win out in this agenda that they have? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think they will, in the sense that they'll get what they want, but I think it's going to be, they're going to leave a big mess. In a lot of ways, I think what already was happening was society was collapsing. And I think in some ways what they're trying to do is more of a controlled demolition that will benefit them. There's that side, and there's a flip side also, that I think they got very scared too, because for the first time in history, the common man has access to as much media and communication means as the average person. Like for me, I mean, I didn't get this published by a professional. This actually looks better if you actually see a hard copy, better than a lot of professionally published books. And I have self-published this myself, and anyone can buy it anywhere in the world from any bookstore. So that's just one example. And then of course, like what you're doing right here with the podcast, which is much more accessible than any radio show had ever been. You know, radio shows, you had to be there at a certain time, and then all that kind of stuff. So I think in a lot of ways, they were very scared they were losing control at the same time. They had already had bankrupt most countries, and then people were waking up and able to share information. So my general feeling is there's already been a lot of suffering and death. I mean, probably more suffering and death in the last 2 years and in developed first world countries, and what's happening in third world countries is even more horrible. And we're going to see a lot more of that. And but at the same time, what we're seeing is this coalescence of people of like mind finally are people who are, I think, have the self-confidence and the self-respect and the humanity to not put up with this, and they're uniting in a way that never would have happened before. And it's so. My prediction is, it's going to get a lot more messy. I think it's going to be a lot nicer on the other end. I don't know if every country will be, and maybe some people will be collecting in certain places. I'm not sure, or at least collecting in certain countries. I wouldn't be surprised if Alberta, for example, breaks off from Canada. And if that's the case, I might be moving there.
Yeah, we might be. That's gone through my mind, and maybe not join up with one of the parts of the USA.
Yes, and the USA may break up too.
Well, it may well. There's, I see the most popular theory I've been reading about is West Coast liberal, Northeast liberal, but they're too far apart geographically to be one unit. And then the South, and then the Midwest as all totally separate cultures. And many of those would be still in the top several countries worldwide, in the world for economy and population and everything else. So I think it could happen, certainly. Yeah, interesting stuff. As I said earlier, you're probably preaching we are preaching to converted with certainly with me, and Kathleen is a little bit more polite about it, but certainly to a degree to her. And I think you've answered the question, but you woke up very quickly, and perhaps because of the work you were doing writing for doctors, to this being a big fraud. It took me about 2 weeks as well, and yet I come from a totally different background to you. Is that about right? That in the first 2 weeks you realized there's something wrong here?
Are you referring from the first 2 weeks when the Prime Minister announced lockdown?
Yeah. When it first became public about how bad this was and how drastic action had to be taken and all this.
Well, yeah, I'd say right from I first heard about it when I was actually in Mexico at the time, when they first announced it and I just shrugged it off. I was just gonna be SARS again, like the SARS-CoV-1. Personally, like with my research into microorganisms, let's call it that. Like, I'm a terrain theorist. I don't actually believe contagious diseases exist in the first place. So that once I know they're doing anything with contagious diseases, I either know they're just not paying attention and there's another cause, or they're faking it. That's my opinion. But no, and oh boy, I mean, there was just so many obvious layers of lies with it, because I knew that lockdowns would not do nothing.
Absolutely.
I mean, that was ridiculous, especially locking down healthy people. That's never been done. They were just doing things, like, they admit that they had no data, and they admitted that they're doing things that never been done before or tested. So, I mean, they're talking out of, I guess, it's frustrating, because to me, it was so obvious they were lying every time they opened their mouth. I think how they got away with it is because they had coordinated it so well that the whole world was lying at the same time.
At the same time, yeah.
With a few exceptions.
Which in itself must make any logical thinking person suspicious, right? When the whole world does something in lockstep like that. It does.
That's another way of looking at it. Yeah, I never thought of that.
Yeah.
Though I remember I had people saying to me, if you can't trust the World Health Organization, who can you trust? Which became a line in my novel. So it's like, oh God, I'll write that down.
Right. I think I remember that. We're sort of getting close to time. Kathleen, you need to ask John something.
Yes, John, tell us how people can contact you and where they can buy your book.
Sure. Well, my website is blazingpinecone.com. If they want to go straight to the book page on the site, they can go to muchadoaboutcorona.com. Otherwise, the book's available almost anywhere you can get a book. So, of course, Amazon has it. And if you buy it from Amazon, that's great. Please leave a review, because they still kind of rule the book world. But I've been amused by how many people who are readers of this book who refuse to buy anything from Amazon, so which I can understand. And so right on the website, if they do go to muchadoaboutcorona.com, there is actually a link there that shows how you can order it from your own bookstore or get it in your library. I've been pleased to find out several Canadian libraries already have it.
Good.
Which,
excellent.
Yeah. If people request it, it's pretty hard for them to deny it, because it's a story set in Canada, written by a Canadian author. So that falls under their CanLit requirements. So I think having this in libraries would kind of gives it a status of acceptability, but also will reach people that it wouldn't otherwise reach, even though it makes me less money, but I'm okay with that. Which is also kind of neat. A lot of people don't know, if a book goes in a Canadian library fiction, the government actually sends the author money.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, every year is to help compensate for your lost sales. So I think the Governor General writes it or something like that. I don't know, but anyways, I look forward to that check.
Yeah, that'll be good.
So, and then also on my website, if they want to, they can subscribe. They can go if they want to see. Like I said, been writing articles about this since March 2020. So the website's blog goes back to March 2020, and they can read it right from the beginning, me speaking out about this. And then if they want to sign up, I put out an email now about every week. They're kind of more different than the news. The kind of more news based emails that people usually are getting about this. I've been trying to make them a little more entertaining and a little more about the humanity of what's going on versus the science and so forth, which now they can get 100 different sources. Well, so when I started, hardly anyone was speaking out. Even the alternative media was on board with this.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm going to jump in quick and say I've been subscribing to John's weekly newsletter for several months. And since meeting John in the rain outside the City Hall in Stratford, I think way back in January or something, we one miserable afternoon, but we did our bit. And I've been subscribing to his newsletter, and it's well worth having. He has lots of good stuff in there, a bit of humor, a bit of news, a bit of entertainment, but well worth getting. So thanks for that.
Well,
Oh, no,
Peter,
thank you.
we are out of time, but thank you so much for joining us, John. It's been wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you. And
Great.
yes, and thank you all again for tuning in. And until next time, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.